This week, I want to cover moving your organization from a control environment into one of freedom. And when I have talked to executives that have this want to get out of the control because they've read some of my um, documents that I have, or a blog, or um, even a phone call or a video that I've done, they all want to get out of their control type environment that they're in. And uh, when people get really exuberant, one of the things that they do is they immediately just want to make the shift. And they don't want to take some of the steps that need to happen in order for you to move from a control type of organization to one where there's lots of freedom. And often the results are what you might expect. If you don't do things in a methodical way, you immediately move too quickly, and the organization isn't ready for it. And you have to kind of bring everybody along, and my system anyway, in order to make that happen. Now, the good news is, and I'll talk about it more at the end, but you can move through it relatively quickly as long as you have a method. But let's start this and just kind of compare what I'm talking about so you get a sense. I'm not going to put everything in it, but they're probably the big things that are talked about, and the difference between, having an organization based in control and one based in um, freedom. And so the first thing is that, when I walk into organizations, I get a very quick feel. Worked with a lot of different organizations as far as um, what control looks like very quickly. And that people often ask, well, what do you see? So here are some of the things. Um, there is a sense of hierarchy. Nobody makes a decision in a control organization other than an executive or management, or often nowadays, which is kind of a nuance, is support organizations. Especially IT, finance, that dictate HR, that dictate a lot of the decision making to people, uh, to the workers. And when I'm talking in terms of a organization based in freedom, we're talking more about uh, the decisions being made where the worker has that decision making power over their own work, rather than executives or management or support areas coming and telling them what to do and what's good for them. And the reason being, there's a couple of reasons. One is knowledge is based with the worker. They know how their work proceeds. They take phone calls, potentially deal with customers. These are the frontline people. And if you're having decisions made in the hierarchy or in these support organizations, the problem you have is, you have the worker basically throw up their hands and say, okay, well, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it that way. And that leads to an environment that's um, uh, where the control is more important than the freedom for the worker, because you have to bring the worker along regardless. Um, they aren't going to go along if they can't make decisions about their own work, and they're constantly being dictated to by, the hierarchy or these support areas that think they're in control of things. Um, so that's one of the first things. The second thing is a matter of how people, executives, organizations think about uh, trusting and distrust. So in a control environment, there's very much a lot of distrust. If we let these people over here make, get too much control in the hand of the worker and too much freedom, then boy, that bad things are going to happen. And so that right there is really damaging. And if you listen to some of the when this YouTube channel podcast was with kind of the what I reference as neuroscience, or it was named Mind Your Noodles. It was the noodles in the heads of people that I was referencing, and when one of the interviews I did was with a neuroscientist that basically said, when you got that much distrust in your organization, then it just ruins the atmosphere and people wanting to even work there. They just okay, again, it's giving up. It's kind of like, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, because I don't get to have any input into what my job is. But the change from going from distrust to trust, it doesn't just happen. People seem to think that, well, if I just change my attitude or I start giving people, they got to know what to do. And that's why it's important. And why I'll talk at the end about, you need method to do that. Another difference between a control organization and freedom in an organization is micromanagement, where you're constantly having to report on, did they meet certain standards and criteria? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at the beginning. When people are learning, there needs to be some degree of micromanagement to help them learn. But you also have to let them go a little bit to kind of, okay, am I getting this right? Type of thing. But ultimately, you get past that phase, and then it just becomes annoying. And especially if the people dictating, their edicts on them are don't really have any knowledge of the actual work. And I'm not talking about knowledge of management or leadership or anything like that, but I'm talking about of the work that's being done. See that tremendous amount in information technology companies, no matter who they are, because they always, you get a manager in there. Oh, we hired a manager that has no idea what software development is. So it's management's job when you have freedom, an organization based in freedom, is to really remove barriers for the workers to be able to, once they've made decisions about things, to be able to remove the barriers that keep them from doing their work. And a lot of those barriers are support areas. So I'll be perfectly honest with you. Oh, we got to have that, or they can't have that, or, whatever it might be. It's a forced will type of thing. And then another thing is, I always hear about process focus, but whenever I hear, oh, we're doing process improvement. Okay, well, let me see what that looks like. And, when people say that they're process focused, what I see is looking at it into the minutia of an organization where they're trying to improve something at a very small level without any consideration of what else is going on within the organization. And so the idea of, in an organization based in freedom, it's more systems focused, that we take things. Yeah, we have to analyze things and break them down. Excuse me. But they also have to understand how it fits into the bigger picture of the organization, a systems view, or synthetic thinking, as I use that word. Another criteria basically for a control organization is they're always talking about efficiencies. And because of this focus on analysis and very small things, because people only will, you can only be efficient if you're only looking at one part. You can only be effective on the freedom side of things if you understand what the whole is. So it gets back to this thinking, this systems thinking component. that you can see the whole versus just a piece of what's going on in the organization. Another thing is in a control type of organization, you have rules and policies and procedures, and they're almost scripts for contact centers, and it's almost it paralyzes you when you get a phone call on the front line or dealing with a customer, because you have a whole series of checklists and rules about what you can or can't say, and it's very frustrating for somebody on the front line, because oftentimes these rules and policies and procedures clash or don't fit what necessarily the customer needs out of a situation. And so I've always found it more beneficial when you get clarity around having an aim, you have principles that you work to, as opposed to rules and policies and procedures, and that you also have built what I call customer creed. Now, those are 6 things that I run into, and it's so much easier to run an organization, have people happy to work in your organization when you have the things I just talked about in place, where the worker's making the decisions about their own work, where you have trust, where you have management removing barriers, where you have, everything is system focused rather than, minutia focused, that you are building principles, and you have a clear aim, and you have what I reference as customer creed. Those are huge differences for an organization. But again, it doesn't happen overnight. And when I talk to people on the phone, they think, oh, I've watched a few of your videos and I'm going to go off and, implement some of this stuff. I try to give warnings, type of thing. But oftentimes people don't want to listen. They think they know, and they find out pretty quickly that it's much harder to move from that control type of an organization to that organization based in freedom. Now, the one thing can make it happen quickly, depending on the size of your organization, is a method. And that is what I provide organizations, is a method. It takes you step by step on what you need to do to move from this kind of control environment that you've built in almost every organization. It's just the way it is. We have these really hierarchical organizations where workers are supposed to do what I tell you to do. And there's varying degrees, and I'll admit that, and a lot of times the difference is tried to be made up between control and freedom, where people say, well, I have freedom in my organization, but upon closer review, it really isn't. What they are doing is they may replace freedom with new leadership skills or something like that, and doesn't really have anything to do with the things that I'm talking about here. Now, what do you do? What are some of the big picture steps that you have to do? Well, one of the first things is you have to study your organization as a whole, as the system, and be able to understand whether you have a clear aim in your organization. You can tell when you go to the front line or where interactions with customers are in your organization, how things are playing out. Because it doesn't really matter in a lot of other places. Where it matters the most is going to be in that touch point between the customer and your organization. And once you get a grasp and take yourself through and listening to customers, and again, I have a step-by-step process that I can put people through to get that to develop those synthetic thinking skills. But that's step number one, and that has to be done at the executive level and the worker level and everywhere within the organization. Now you can go and start getting clarity around what the aim is. of your organization. What good for what people in your organization. You begin to build principles associated with it rather than rules and policies and procedures. If there's rules and policies and procedures that are needed, the worker will pull for them rather than be forced upon them. Okay. And then the other thing that you're building as you're listening to customers, as you go through my system, is a customer creed, which is once you've understood all the customers and the way that customers interact with the organizations, you'll know what's important to customers. It'll be crystal clear. And that will then influence the principles that you have and will influence potentially what your aim looks like for your organization. So those are some large, without getting into the minutia, and that's what the reason I have a whole course on this for executives and for business transformation is, you got to have a method in order to do it. And again, I don't care if it's my method or somebody else's method, or you just want to go off and give it a shot. I've seen that plenty of times. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think you get the lessons you learn will help you understand that it's not necessarily easy to do without a method that other organizations have used. So anyway, that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way.